The call came at 5:43 on a Thursday afternoon. I was standing in the middle of a skeletal frame in South Park, the smell of fresh-cut pine and damp red clay clinging to my skin. Sawdust was matted into my hair, and my steel-toed boots were caked in a thin layer of gray concrete dust. My mother's voice had that fragile, careful tremor she used right before dropping a bomb. She didn't ask how my day was. She didn't ask about the 28-unit complex I was finishing 3 weeks ahead of schedule. She just told me not to come to Thanksgiving dinner. It wasn't because of a fight. It wasn't because I'd done something wrong. It was because my younger brother, Wilder, had asked her to uninvite me. Wilder works at a bank headquarters downtown. He wears tailored navy suits and spends his days talking about portfolio optimization and risk management. Apparently, he'd finally landed a woman he considered high society, a prestigious interior designer named Genevieve. Wilder told my mother that having a sister who looked like a grease monkey and smelled like a job site would embarrass him in front of her. He wanted to present a certain image of our family, and I didn't fit the brand. My mother whispered into the phone, asking if I understood why it was so important to him. I stared at the orange sun dipping behind the raw timber of my latest project. I felt the grit under my fingernails and the weight of the keys to a multi-million-dollar company in my pocket. I said I understood. I hung up before she could offer a pity brunch for the following weekend. I didn't tell her that in 5 days, the shiny, fragile world Wilder built on lies was going to shatter in front of everyone. As I walked to my truck, my phone vibrated in my hand. It was an alert from Credit Karma. Someone had just attempted to pull my business credit for a $500,000 bridge loan. I didn't need to check the IP address. I knew exactly who it was. The credit alert didn't surprise me. It just confirmed that Wilder had finally crossed the line from being a jerk to being a criminal. I sat in my truck, watching the dust settle on the windshield, and remembered a peace offering dinner he'd hosted a month ago. He'd been unusually kind, pouring me glass after glass of expensive wine, talking about how he wanted us to be a real family again. I'd played along, letting the alcohol take hold, until I drifted off on his sofa. I wasn't as far gone as he thought, though. Through squinted eyes, I watched him pick up my work tablet. I felt the dry press of my own thumb against the sensor as he used my hand to bypass the security. I saw the flash of his phone camera as he photographed my social security card and my business incorporation papers. I could have stopped him right then. I could have snatched the tablet back and ended the charade. But I've spent 31 years being the spare daughter, the one who worked double shifts at 19 to pay the mortgage on the family home while Wilder went to an ivy-covered university on my dime. My parents called him their golden boy banker, while I was just the girl who got her hands dirty. For a decade, I've been the invisible pillar holding up their lives. Every Sunday dinner was a sermon on Wilder's latest promotion or his optimized 401k. While my mother would glance at my calloused palms and ask if I'd found a real career yet, they never bothered to look at the name on the tax bills or the property deeds I'd quietly moved into my own holding company to save them from foreclosure. Wilder thought he was being a shark. He thought he'd found a way to fund his high society wedding by bleeding my business dry behind my back. He didn't realize that I'd been waiting for him to try. I'd spent years building homes, but I'd spent even longer building a cage for his ego. I started the engine. Wilder wanted to be a big-time player in the financial world. I was about to give him a front-row seat to how a real mogul handles a breach of contract. They broke me 10 years ago when they told me I wasn't good enough for their table. But today, I'm the one holding the hammer. Wilder's next move was as predictable as a cheap blueprint. An hour later, my phone lit up with a text. "Hey Sloan. Genevieve and I are looking at this place at Legacy Point. It's a bit of a stretch, but you know how it is. Since you're just doing whatever it is you do with bricks and dirt, I figured you wouldn't mind sending over $10,000 as an early wedding gift. Think of it as your contribution to the family's reputation." I didn't argue. I didn't point out that he hadn't even invited me to the wedding he wanted me to fund. I just typed back, "Sure. Happy for you," and hit send on the wire transfer. I knew that money wasn't for a house. It was the non-refundable deposit for the white Porsche 911 he'd been eyeing. He wanted to pull up to the Thanksgiving gala looking like a king. But while he was busy picking out leather upholstery, I was making a phone call to a friend in bank compliance. I didn't ask her to hack anything that's for movies. I gave her the transaction ID from the credit pull, and told her the truth. My brother is attempting to secure a $500,000 bridge loan using my corporate tax ID and a forged electronic signature. Don't decline it. Just flag the file for a manual audit and hold the funds in escrow for 48 hours. By law, the bank had to freeze the movement of funds once a fraud alert was placed. But the internal dashboard Wilder looked at would still show the loan as approved pending distribution. He would think he'd won. He would think he had $500,000 coming his way to cover the tracks of his theft. I spent the next 2 days finishing my gifts. I reveal to you now that I was the anonymous donor who'd spent $30,000 over the last year buying up Genevieve's entire interior design portfolio for my high-end builds. She thought she was a rising star on her own merit. Wilder thought he was dating a wealthy socialite who didn't need his money. I wanted her to be successful enough to have a reputation worth losing. I wanted her to be standing on top of the world so that when I pulled the rug out from under Wilder, she would be the one to push him into the abyss. The trap was set. The concrete was pouring, and Wilder was about to find out that when you try to steal from a builder, you'd better make sure you aren't standing under the crane. The Thanksgiving gala was held at a modern coastal mansion overlooking the Sound. It was a masterpiece of glass, steel, and cantilevered concrete, a project my firm had finished only 6 months ago. Wilder had been bragging for weeks that he'd consulted on the financing for the estate, using it as a backdrop to prove his elite status to Genevieve's family. I arrived an hour late. I didn't wear my work boots. I wore a backless silk gown the color of midnight and heels that made me 6 feet of cold, hard resolve. When I stepped into the foyer, the air seemed to suck out of the room. My mother's glass nearly slipped from her hand. My father just stared, his mouth slightly open. Wilder was across the room, leaning against a marble kitchen island, holding a crystal flute of champagne. When he saw me, his face twisted. He marched over, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "What are you doing here, Sloane?" I told Mom to make it clear. "This is a professional circle. You still smell like a basement. Get out before you make a scene, and ruin this for me." I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. I didn't hand it to him. I handed it to my father. "Happy Thanksgiving, Dad." It's an itemized invoice. Every mortgage payment, every property tax, and every one of Wilder's emergency bank transfers I've covered over the last 10 years. Since I'm not family enough for dinner, I'd like my investment back. With interest. Wilder laughed. A high, nervous sound. "You're delusional. Nobody cares about your little temper tantrum." Security. He pointed toward the door, expecting me to be hauled out. But instead of security, the heavy front doors swung open to reveal a flatbed tow truck idling in the circular driveway. The guests crowded toward the windows, whispering. Wilder's face went from red to a sickly, pale gray as he watched the repo man hook the winch to his brand-new white Porsche. I leaned in close to his ear, my voice smooth as silk. "I didn't steal your car, Wilder. I called the dealership as the primary source of the down payment funds. Once I proved the money came from a flagged, fraudulent bridge loan under my company's name, they were more than happy to take back the keys. You aren't a king, little brother. You're just a squatter in a house I built." Wilder's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He looked at Genevieve, then at the window where his status was being dragged away on a steel chain, and then back at me. You can't do this, Sloane. It's Thanksgiving. You're ruining everything over a car?" "It's not over a car, Wilder," I said, my voice cutting through the sudden silence of the room. "It's over the $500,000 you tried to steal from my company yesterday morning." The guests gasped. Genevieve stepped back from him, as if he'd suddenly caught fire. "Wilder? What is she talking about?" Before he could spin another lie, a tall, gray-haired man in a charcoal suit stepped out from the crowd. It was Mr. Henderson, the senior vice president of the bank where Wilder worked. Wilder's jaw dropped. He hadn't realized I'd invited his boss as my personal guest. "I was wondering when you'd mention Legacy Point, Wilder," Mr. Henderson said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "I spent the afternoon reviewing the bridge loan application you pushed through the system yesterday, the one with Sloane's forged electronic signature. I already spoke to the compliance team. The funds were flagged and frozen 2 hours ago." Wilder began to stammer, his eyes darting toward the door. "Sir, I can explain. It was a temporary move. You were going to commit federal bank fraud to fund a life you couldn't afford," Mr. Henderson interrupted. "I've already notified the board. You're fired, Wilder, and the police are waiting in the foyer to discuss the identity theft charges." Genevieve looked at the ring on her finger, the one Wilder told her was a family heirloom. I leaned in and whispered, "He bought that with a $10,000 gift I sent him last week. It's not an heirloom. It's a liability." She ripped the ring off and threw it at his chest. My parents stood frozen, watching their golden boy be led out in handcuffs by 2 plainclothes officers. The respectable career they'd worshipped for a decade had just ended in a mugshot. As the front door clicked shut, the coastal mansion, the one they thought proved their son's greatness, felt suddenly, bone-chillingly cold. I didn't stay for the turkey. I had a plane to catch for a new build in the morning. Wilder was out on bail 3 days later. My mother had hawked her engagement ring, and my father had drained his remaining emergency fund to get their golden boy out of a holding cell. I knew he was out before they even called me, because my security feed at the North Park job site sent a silent alert to my phone at 2 o'clock in the morning. I watched the screen of my laptop, the grainy black and white thermal footage showing a shadow creeping toward my $1 million custom excavator. Wilder was carrying a red plastic jerry can, his movements jagged and desperate. He didn't know I'd upgraded the site's security the day after the uninvitation. He thought he could hurt my business the way I'd hurt his pride. As he unscrewed the cap and splashed gasoline over the tracks of the machine, the AI thermal sensors triggered the automated fire suppression system. Instead of water, the nozzles blasted a high-pressure cloud of indelible blue security dye and fire-retardant foam. Wilder was instantly soaked from head to toe in a vibrant, neon blue chemical that takes weeks to scrub off the skin. The police arrived 4 minutes later to find him glowing like a ghost in the dark, smelling of gasoline and failure. This time, there was no bail. The judge saw the video and the intent, and Wilder was charged with first-degree criminal mischief and attempted arson. The next morning, I stood in my parents' living room. They were sobbing, begging me to drop the charges, to be the bigger person. I didn't get angry. I didn't raise my voice. I just handed them a final legal notice. I bought the debt on this house 6 months ago when the bank was ready to auction it off, I said, my voice as cold as the morning air. I was going to give it back to you for Christmas. But after Wilder's visit to my site last night, I've decided to move in a different direction. You have 30 days to vacate. The foreclosure is final. My mother collapsed onto the sofa, the one I'd paid for, and my father couldn't even look me in the eye. I walked out of that house, the sawdust finally gone from my hair, and headed straight to the airport. I had a $5 million contract waiting for me in the mountains, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying anyone else's weight on my shoulders. I was finally building something for myself. The gavel didn't just fall. It sounded like the closing of a tomb. Wilder was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for bank fraud and identity theft, with a court order to pay $342,000 in restitution. The golden boy, who was too good for a sister in work boots, was now wearing a numbered orange jumpsuit. The community reaction was swift and brutal. The elite professional circles Wilder craved didn't just gossip. They erased him. Genevieve's family issued a public statement, severing all ties, and the bank scrubbed his name from their website within 20 minutes of the verdict. Reputation in this town is like a glass house once it shatters. You can't glue the shards back together. 6 months into his sentence, I received a letter. The envelope was stamped with the prison logo. It was 10 pages of Wilder's cramped handwriting, filled with the same old poison. I'm still your brother, he wrote. I did it for us. I wanted to lift the family up. You destroyed us because you were jealous. I didn't get angry. I didn't even finish reading it. I felt a strange, hollow indifference. I stood by the shredder in my new office, watched the paper turn into confetti, and realized that his words no longer had any weight. He was a ghost in a cell, and I was the one holding the keys to my own life. My life is different now. My chosen family doesn't look like the one I was born into. It's made up of people like Miguel, my lead carpenter, and Mr. Henderson, who became a mentor. We eat dinner on Friday nights not to perform success, but to celebrate it. There is no sawdust in the soup, and there are no lies at the table. Just peace. I'm Sloane, and I'm finally free. If you're listening to this, I want you to remember something. Blood doesn't make you family. Loyalty does. You are allowed to walk away from people who hurt you, even if you share a last name. You are not a spare or a vessel for someone else's ego. Trust is earned, not owed. Don't spend 10 years trying to prove your worth to people who are determined to see you as small. Build your own foundation. Build your own empire, because when the dust settles, the only person who needs to be proud of what you've built is you. If your family asked you to stay invisible so they could shine, would you keep holding up the roof? Or would you let it fall? Tell me your story in the comments.